Hello and welcome to this episode of Class is in Session. I'm your host, Ashley Stevens. And this show, we typically take a look at things happening in the HBCU space. But today, we have a special episode to educate you on this Class is in Session about suicide awareness prevention. And as September is Suicide Awareness Prevention Month, recognized by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration as a time to remember the lives lost to suicide and also acknowledge the millions who have been impacted by suicidal thoughts and also the families and loved ones who have lost those to suicide. It's also a time to share stories of hope. And today we'll hear a story of hope from a suicide survivor, Sherrie Lynn Lilley. She shares her empowering stories, and she also offers tips to destigmatize this topic. Sherrie Lynn Lilley lost her sight as an adult after being diagnosed with a degenerative eye disease. Yet she has managed to gain incredible spiritual vision by overcoming so many obstacles. From growing up in Bermuda, facing childhood trauma and assault, to losing her sight as an adult, during which her husband left her to raise 5 children by herself while going to school, and getting her master's degree. Thanks to the support of New York State, Sherrie Lynn has had an array of services provided to her to advance her education. And today, she is a counselor, mental health advocate, and educator. And she's founder and owner of Heal Creative Coaching and Pneuma Counseling and Consulting based in Bermuda. And she's assisting her home country, which does not have a Disabilities Act, to educate and empower those with different physical and intellectual abilities. So on this special edition of Classes in Session, we are honored to have with us Sherrie Lynn Lilley. Hello and welcome, Sherrie Lynn.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
We are delighted to have you. I am so empowered and encouraged by your story that you have taken, personal situations in your life and one geared them toward entrepreneurship, but also to empower other people. Let's just start from the beginning. As September, although the month is winding down, but it is still Suicide Awareness Prevention Month. Tell us about your story as a suicide survivor.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Bermuda and I grew up with a lot of childhood trauma. I was chronically molested as a child, sexually molested. It started at around age 7, where I was actually violated, raped by a coworker of my mother at the time. And that kind of started me on a path of just unresolved, accumulated trauma. At that age, I was a little aware, but not fully aware of what it all meant. It was pretty typical in that this person gently threatened. I was a child, so there was no real kind of aggression. It was, this is our secret, and be sure that you don't share it, because if you do, then you're the one that's going to get into trouble. And I think that at that time, what was most impactful was the fact that nobody noticed. I felt a little invisible. I can say that now. I think looking back, it wasn't necessarily that I didn't have that level of awareness, but for sure, I remember just being concerned that my uniform had gotten dirty and that I need to clean up. If not, mom's going to be upset. She had these 4 children that she was going to come running home to wrangle into some kind of order and prepare for the next day. And that's exactly what happened. And um, I had other kind of fallout from that. I became a bedwetter. I became very introverted and quiet and withdrawn. And still, I felt like nobody saw me. And so that was the beginning. And then there was a quiet space, I call it, between then and when my parents were divorced when I was about 12. And my mom moved away with all of us kids. And as part of her survival, I always love to redeem her, right? So let me redeem her first because she's not a villain. She also, to a certain extent, was a victim, but she exposed us, and I'll say me, I'll speak for my own story. She exposed me to a lot of male friends, and her lifestyle changed a bit, a lot of trauma for her as well after the divorce. And all of these male people that came in and out of our family molested me. And I got to a point where um, I got the courage that I was going to tell, because by now I'm old enough. I'm 12, I'm 13. I know right from wrong. and it was uncomfortable and I didn't like it. And so I confided in my little baby sister. It's only two girls, and then there's boys. And so I told my sister, and she said, "Come, I'll go with you." So we went to go and tell my mom, and I decided that I would pick, the person that I felt she would react to the strongest. And so I told her, and I remember her just kind of taking a beat, taking a breath, and changing the subject.
Mm.
And I was devastated. And I made up in my mind at that time, around age 13, that if my mom couldn't save me, then nobody could. I would have to save myself. And that idea, that concept really shaped the way that I moved through most of the rest of my teenage years, all of my young adult years, and well into my marriage, which was around age 20. I got married, right?
Mhm.
And all of that searching and seeking, and this now skewed view of love. I thought that love meant connecting with men, and it was just very unhealthy. And so, if I could fast forward to a bit of how I came around to being suicidal, is that at 20, I married someone who himself had his own kind of mommy wounds, daddy wounds, and trauma. And a lot of the negative kind of self talk that came after my mom didn't rescue me the way I thought she should have, was being reinforced now by another person that was supposed to kind of be my savior and love me and take care of me. And so where I was saying to myself, "Sherri, you're unworthy. Sherri, you don't deserve this or that. Good things will never come to you. You're never going to measure up to anything." Um, a lot of these messages that I was telling myself, I was homeless in between all of this. So
Mm.
much things were happening, and now I married someone that, in his own way, was reinforcing a lot of that. Would say things to me that reinforced that. So around age 23, I had already had my first little son. He was about 2. And honestly, it was so much internal pain. Sometimes I could feel the release of the hormones in my body that ached. And eventually, the accumulation of all of that became very physical. I started having a lot of gastrointestinal problems. My stomach always hurt. I had chronic headaches. And I also had a lot of joint pain. So inflammation around my knees, and in my hands. And all of this was really negative when I went to the doctor. There was nothing wrong with me. So I didn't know then. I know now that it was a lot of stress. It was a
Mhm.
lot of accumulation of mental and emotional pain that had built up. And this is what brought me to the place of having a suicidal thoughts initially. And then that kind of spiral where it was almost nonstop. Every time there was something said, every time I felt bad, then my mind went to, the only way to relieve this pain is to take your life. And I remember
Mm.
looking at my little boy, and one of the myths of suicide is that, you can look at your children and that will just flip the switch and you won't do it. But for many, it's actually the opposite. You look at the child. I looked at my son and I was like, I'm really no good for this boy.
Mm.
What can I do to grow him up in a healthy environment? Um, you know, I'm not a good mother. And so all of that negative self-talk actually was compiled when I looked at my son. And I was convinced that the best thing for him was also to take my life. And so I
Mm.
attempted on 2 occasions. And thank God I'm still here. So I did not complete the suicide, but I attempted on a couple of occasions. Um, and then thankfully someone intervened and kind of scooped me away, and I got my first intervention with an awesome wonderful pastor's wife who sat with me for 24 hours and just let me cry and let me hurt and would pray with me occasionally, but really just sat with me. And that was the beginning of my journey out of suicide being the answer to the
Mhm.
depth of my ache and my pain. And gratefully, thankfully, I am probably about 28 years without any suicidal ideation. So that's one of my biggest messages in my prevention work, is that for the average person, not talking about people that are living with pervasive mental illness. I'm really just talking about the average person that, for whatever reason, whether it's life stresses, whether it's an accumulation of trauma, as in my case, can get to that point where the pain gets so great
Yeah.
that what we believe is that we want to die, but what we really want is to relieve ourselves of the deep wounds and the pain that comes with it. So that's a bit of how I journeyed to suicide, and a bit of how I journeyed out of it as well.
Well, we're certainly grateful you journeyed out of it, right? And that you're able to share your very candid experiences in terms of how you got there. A lot of childhood trauma compounded with, things that happened early on in marriage. And we're just great. Honestly, Sherrie Lynn, we're grateful you're here to share the story. And I think what's also important for our audience here is that you turn your personal journey into a business model in a way to empower other people. So tell us a little on how your personal story and struggles influence your decision to work in the mental health and counseling space.
Yeah, I think when I think back, I always had a lean already to be in helping spaces. I think that every human being already has inside of them their gifts. And if you pay attention really early, you will uncover and discover them. And since I was a teenager, even while I was going through a lot of my turmoil, I found myself in spaces where I was mentoring other young people, or I found that I could listen really well, in some situations, even advise me. But I already kind of had a lean toward that. And so it was about 12 or 13 years ago that I felt like, well, I didn't get to go to college right out of high school. And so I would like to go to college. That was a thought. I dabbled a little bit in looking, but I really gave up because by this time I was a full time mother. And, now I had five little people running around my feet. But trauma happened again. And my marriage dissolved. My husband packed up and left, and it was actually that trauma that catalyzed me, that pushed me. And I made had to make some decisions about how I was going to live my life and model something different for my children. I didn't want my kids, like me, to spend their entire youth managing trauma. And so I picked myself up. I had to put my own kind of need to care for myself aside for a bit while I stabilized them. And part of the way I took care of myself is that I went off to school. At that time, I was also at the end of my vision. I literally had just lost the last of my usable vision when I registered to go off to school. And I don't know, I didn't, I felt like with the children,
Mhm.
I didn't really have any other choice but to figure out how to move forward. And counseling made sense to me. Um, I didn't have a lot of experience with counseling at the time in my own life, but I knew that this natural lean to help others made a lot of sense. And so I found this amazing program at, I call it the little engine that could, because it's this little tiny college in Newark, New Jersey called Pillar College. At that time, it was Somerset Christian College, and they changed their name, I think, at the end of the first semester I was there. And it ended up being such an amazing safe haven because I was in a Christian environment, but the education was exquisite. They did something that I didn't think could be done, having grown up in a very, very religious and quite rigid Pentecostal environment myself.
Mhm.
Counseling, psychology, these things were taboo. But I landed in this little school where I had these amazing professors who brought scripture to life and made bridging mental health and the Bible and scripture and the gospel, made it make sense. And actually, a lot of my introduction to my own healing happened in those classrooms as I was learning to be a counselor myself. And I love that so much that that was my first experience. And then my master's degree, I wanted to have a more secular experience so that I could hear what the world was saying about mental health. And so off I went to Fordham University, where I earned my master's in clinical mental health counseling. And then from there, didn't know what I was going to do. I work in another practice with the lady that was supervising me, because that's the next step, is to accumulate your hours toward your license. So I was doing that, and in my travels back and forth to Bermuda, where I was born, I started a charity there called Inspire Bermuda, to advocate for persons living with disabilities, heading towards some legislation. And people learned that I was becoming a counselor. And in my community conversations and community education, I guess that part of me that is very integrated as a helper came out, and people started asking me if I had a practice. And I said no, and I wasn't even thinking anywhere near having a practice. But the question kept coming up. And in June of 2022, I figured I would investigate, explore what it would take. And in July of that summer, spent the whole summer in Bermuda, I came back to the United States with a practice that I had no intention of starting. And so that's how Pneuma got started. And HEAL, which is an acronym for Healing Emotions, Affirming Life. My coaching practice actually started in 2015, just as, again, my way of tapping into what God was doing in my life and what my healing journey was looking like. And I just really thought it would be great to help others. So I went and did a coaching certification, and I started my coaching business, which is based here in New York City. So that's kind of how I found my way into the profession, having already, just really felt like it was a natural kind of progression. And I absolutely love what I do. And the mental health education part of it now, I've also really fallen in love with, being able to share with people practical ways. And that's important to me
Mhm.
because Black and Brown people are still learning how to come to therapy. And so my approach is not to sit and wait. My approach is to get out into the community, and if I can bring little bites of information that might spark in someone their need for maybe deeper work, then that's what my mental health education kind of approach is all about. So I'm really grateful. I'm grateful that my story and my journey has evolved and come full circle to where I can use it in a meaningful way.
Sherry, you've done a lot in the mental health education and counseling space, and it's always encouraging to see your journey, how you got here. Let's go back to how you actually lost your sight. I think that'd be important for our viewers to know and to understand as well.
Sure. I was born with a retinal degenerative disease called retinitis pigmentosa, or RP, which slowly, for most people, I think different people have different experiences, but for me, it was a slow progression that robbed me of my vision over time. So, as a child and as a teenager and into my young adult years, my vision was pretty stable and corrected with corrective lenses or glasses. The disease was active in the background and showed up more as night blindness. And eventually, I started to lose my peripheral vision. Eventually, that merged kind of with the vision that was being corrected with the lenses, until eventually I lost all of my sight. Around age 40, it really kind of sped up, and I could literally see the changes from day to day. Activated a lot of grief over time,
Mhm.
but that's how I lost my sight and ended up now is totally blind.
Wow. What were some of the biggest challenges initially in navigating life at that time as a newly single mother of five children who had
Yeah.
lost your physical vision? Tell us a little bit about that process, how that came to be.
Yeah. Adjusting. It's always the adjustment. Living in the dark, which I actually don't live in the dark,
Mhm.
thankfully. I happen to see in my visual field, it looks like maybe a white sheet of paper. And
Hmm.
I thank God for that every day, because I don't know what I would be like if it was always black. But I think as a mom, again, um, my life didn't leave room for me to fully grieve the loss of my vision. It didn't leave too much room for me to sit down and wallow, right? And I say that respectfully. I'm just saying my experience was that I had a 3-year old, a 5-year old, a maybe 10-year old, a 14-year old, 21-year old. And I had to quickly learn how to adapt everything that I was already doing as a mom, now to do it as a blind mom. And thankfully, again, I just believe it's because I didn't have a lot of room. I didn't have a lot of time. I didn't have the support because I live here in New York City most of the time. Now I go back and forth to Bermuda pretty frequently, but I didn't have any family here. So a lot of the adjustment was just between me. The older children helped me a lot. And I took what I did naturally. And to me, it made sense to do the same things and just pretend I was doing it with my eyes closed, which I was. And so it really was just a lot of learning, and I connected with the New York State Commissions for the Blind, which in New York City is a federal agency, who gave me every support that I needed. They created a plan for me. Part of that plan included going to school. That was my choice because you could either go to school, go to work. I learned adaptive technology, so I use the computer every day. Everything around me talks and speaks, and I did mobility instruction, which is how to use my cane. And yeah, I decided, I made choices. It was important that I chose. It was important to me that I modeled for my kids resilience and tenacity. And I would save my tears for nights when I went to bed, because I needed them to see how to push through and how to overcome. And so it wasn't always easy. The older children certainly stepped in and assisted, but we got through it together. And so here we are.
Love that you got through it together. And Sherry, one thing I've heard you mention previously is that you choose not to use the word disability, but you use another term, and I want you to tell us about that.
I use the word exceptionality. And I chose that word because my eyes are such a small part of who I am.
Mhm.
The eyes are two of the smallest organs in the body. And I feel like disability, when I disable something, I always use the picture of a computer. If I take one component out of this computer that I'm talking in right now, it completely disables the entire computer. The loss of my sight has not completely disabled me.
Hmm.
And so my eyes have allowed, I'm an exception. So I don't have physical vision, but I'm an exception to the rule because this one part of me did not stop me from being able to fully function in my life. And so I like the word exceptionality. My disability, which is the universal word, which I will use in universal spaces. But for me, I am an exceptional human being who lives with an exceptionality because this loss, or this taking away of a vital part of functioning did not stop me from being able to function. So that's why I like to use the word exceptionality.
Love that. And I love your usage of it because you're right. You are exceptional. And and losing your physical sight has not stopped you in any way. I think it's so awesome to see you empowering your clients, the public, informing them. Like I said, as a mental health educator, an advocate, and counselor. In fact, you have an upcoming workshop called The Truth About Suicide. Tell us more
Mhm.
about that and where folks can register.
Well, I'm super excited about this workshop. I recently did a major workshop called Demystifying Suicide, which was in a secular environment. But what I am excited about with this particular workshop is that I get to do suicide prevention for the believer, for the person of faith. And so it will be a lot of what I teach in other settings, but through a biblical lens. So I'm super excited about that because I think we don't have a lot of these conversations in our faith spaces. And for so for people of faith, that may be struggling with suicidal ideations. There's so much added layers of what the thought processes are, because we don't take the time in our faith spaces to make sure that we secure one another with truth. And so
Mhm.
that's why it's called The Truth About Suicide. I'm doing this. I'm excited that I'm doing it actually in conjunction with the Job Project, which is a business and ministry run by Christopher and Valerie Lilley, which is my son and daughter-in-law. And so they have a wonderful podcast called The Job Project, and they have a business called The Job Project that goes around into faith spaces and does exactly what we're going to do in this workshop, which is to educate on mental health topics, but through a biblical lens. And it's a newer space, which makes me excited as well, because I think that the church is there now. I think we are more open and we're more honest, and these conversations are making more sense. And so they've jumped on the opportunity. My daughter-in-law is a research psychologist. My son is a mental health advocate,
Nice.
an educator. He's a teacher. He's an opera singer. He's a few things. But this is their event. I believe that registration is at the Joe Project at their website. I think that they're connected and linked to my Heal Creative Coaching Instagram page. So any of those spaces, you can go and find the registration. And I'm looking forward to a really wonderful conversation. And I have a saying, Ashley, that is this: I don't only want people to learn how to avoid death, I want them to understand that they can choose life. And that
Mm.
is a lot of how I approach suicide awareness and prevention. I try to do it in a way that doesn't feel super heavy and you walk away going, oh my God, and you need 3 or 4 days to come up from under. I really try to do it in a way that is empowering, and that, yes, I will teach you how to avoid death, but I will also I will also help you to learn how to choose life. Let that be your choice.
I love that. That's powerful. Choosing life. That's very, very powerful. Exciting to see that you have family members, your own son and daughter-in-law, who are involved in this work and this space as well. I think honestly, Sherrie Lynn, that's a testament to again your vision and you empowering others in this space. Provided a safe space for your own family to want to continue and branch off and do similar work. I think that's awesome. I think that's really, really awesome.
Yeah, it's amazing. It was one of my goals as I stabilized my family, was to make sure I have 4 boys and 1 girl. It was to especially make sure that my boys understood that they could have really excellent mental health as men. And
Mm.
Chris is my oldest. That was the little boy that I was looking at when I was suicidal and going, I'm not going to be good for him. And so to see him really come full circle himself, has his own suicide story, which is incredible because we have so many parallels. But yeah, I'm so proud of him and his wife, his beautiful wife, Valerie, and the choice that they've made to enter into this space themselves, for sure.
Wow, I am proud of them. I do not know them, but I'm proud of them as well. That's very powerful. And I'm wondering, Sherrie Lynn, can you offer to our audience, as we wrap here, any additional tips for our audience to destigmatize any myths surrounding, suicide awareness, suicide ideation? What other tips can you offer that you share, as a part of your work as a mental health educator and counselor?
Sure. I think one of the biggest myths, if I could use that as the way we kind of tie it up, right, is that we believe that if we talk about suicide with a family member that may be having that struggle, or if we tiptoe around that person and not talk about it, that somehow we have an influence over whether or not they complete suicide. When the truth of the matter is that people that are having suicidal ideations very often cannot wait for someone to pay attention and notice that they're really struggling and give them that safe space to talk about it. One of the first steps to suicide prevention is to create safe spaces for conversation. Give that person the ability to say what they're feeling without judgments. Give that person the ability to show up and be able to say, I am suicidal. I am having suicidal ideations. And I want to say to the listener that when someone says that to you, you don't have to be afraid.
Okay.
It's not meant to scare you. When they express it, it's something for you to go, okay, now I know I can take them by the hand and walk them into the help that they need. And so that's one thing that I think is really important. I know that when I was going to college, I was petrified of when this was going to come up. I didn't want to talk about it at all. And now, look what I do. I talk about it all the time because I realize that, again, the person is not necessarily really wanting to die. They're wanting to relieve themselves of the pain. And one of the first ways to do that is to create a safe space for them to express what they're feeling.
Got it. Creating a safe space. You certainly do that. Sherrie Lynn, Lilley, where can folks find out about the important work that you do in this space?
Sure. You can visit my Instagram page and my Facebook page under Heal Creative Coaching. And then for those that might tune in and you're from Bermuda, my counseling practice is based in Bermuda. That's Pneuma, Bermuda.com is my website. That's P like pneumonia, Pneuma, the word Bermuda spelled out. .com. You can send a message in any of these spaces and I will be more than happy to get back to you. Hopefully, before the end of year, we're going to be putting together some of our first coaching packages since I rebranded Heal Creative Coaching. And so people can take advantage of a coaching group that I will do toward the end of the year. Well, we may set it up and we may do it in the new year. So we're still working on some dates for that. And if you're interested, I do public speaking and I can come and talk to your young folk, talk to your women, talk to your churches and wherever. So I'm very excited about kind of just watching my businesses grow. Who am I? I say that every day. I get up every day and I say, God, who am I? You chose me. And then I answer for him. I am his child. And he gave me these gifts for me to share with the world. And so I'm excited that I'm able to do that. So Heal Creative Coaching on Instagram. We just started our YouTube channel. And then pneumabermuda.com is the website for where you can find counseling and consulting and mental health education services. Yeah, I'm excited. Reach out, please do.
No, we are excited. And I meant to ask, what does Pneuma, where did the word Pneuma for your business come from?
Pneuma is a Greek word that means breath or spirit or life. So that is my business mantra. It is Pneuma, breath, spirit, life. And that's a progression. We breathe first, which creates spirit in us, and then we can live. So
Hmm.
that's where Pneuma is a Greek word that means all three of those things. But yes, that's where I got it from.
Wonderful. Breath, spirit, and life. And Sherrie Lynn, Lilley, you have given us all of those things today. You've given us spirit with your beautiful spirit and life by encouraging folks to choose life and just breathing, allowing folks to really enjoy and live each moment. And for those that are struggling, you've been helpful to remind us here today that there are options. There are options. You can always choose life. Sherrie Lynn, Lilley, thank you so much for being here on this special edition of Classes in Session.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, to those of you watching, we've been delighted to have Sherrie Lynn Lilley. She is the founder of Heal Creative Coaching, also, and Heal Creative Coaching and Pneuma Counseling and Consulting based in Bermuda. And she also teaches about suicide prevention awareness, as September is Suicide Awareness Prevention Month, but her work extends beyond that. She has a powerful personal testimony. So be sure to share this episode with family and friends, but we would be remiss to not share some tips for someone who you may be struggling, or you may know someone who may be struggling with mental health crisis right now. SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, has a hotline, the number 988. 988. It's that simple. You can text or call 988 if you or someone you know are struggling with suicide or suicidal ideation. It's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week service across the United States. It is free and confidential. There's also a chat line at 988lifeline.org. 988lifeline.org. Again, call or text 988 if you are struggling. And as Sherrie Lynn mentioned, if you are struggling, there's no shame in it. please do feel free to share, feel free to open up. We've been so excited to have her on this special edition of Classes in Session. And again, stay posted for all of our podcasts and great content across our social media platforms and Black Enterprise's YouTube channel as well. And you can also stay posted for the latest and greatest digital content at blackenterprise.com. For this edition of Classes in Session, I'm your host, Ashley Stevens, and class is dismissed.